The eviction notice arrived when I was sitting in my favorite armchair, my worn-out sneakers propped up on the coffee table. My name is Andrew, 34 years old, and I've spent the last few years of my life building a career that I could be proud of. I was living in a modest two-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, trying to make ends meet and keep my head above water. It wasn't much, but it was mine, or so I thought. It had been a long day. My boss had dropped a mountain of work on my desk, and I'd just finished a dinner of cold leftovers when I heard the knock. A quick, impatient rap at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it. There it was. The crisp, white paper, official seal. Now the words that hit me like a ton of bricks. You are hereby evicted, effective immediately. I blinked at the paper in disbelief. My stomach twisted into knots, and for a moment I thought I was dreaming. How could this be happening? I'd been a good tenant, paid my rent on time, kept the place clean, and followed all the rules. But there it was in black and white. I was being forced out. I looked up at the hallway, my mind racing. The door to my neighbor's apartment was ajar, and I could hear the faint sound of laughter from the apartment upstairs. But none of that mattered. It didn't change what was happening to me. The notice didn't even explain why. It's just a vague mention of contract violation. Vincent. My landlord had always been a shady character, but I never expected him to pull something like this. I'd heard the stories how he was known for his greed, how he'd been skimming money off tenants for years, hiking up rent without reason, and ignoring maintenance requests. This was different. This felt personal. I called the number. On the notice, my hand shaking. No answer. I left a message, hoping for some kind of explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I could fix this. But deep down, I knew. Vincent had chosen this moment. And something told me this was just the beginning. As I stood there, the weight of the situation pressing down on me, the thought crossed my mind. I had spent years of my life paying into Vincent's pockets, trusting him, believing in the simple fairness of a landlord-tenant relationship. Now I saw him for what he truly was, nothing more than a manipulative, entitled man. I wasn't just going to sit back and take this. I wasn't going to lose my home without a fight. That's when I knew I would make Vincent regret this. And the way I was going to do it was going to change everything. The first step was simple. Find out everything I could about Vincent and the building he owned. It was time for a little payback. I've always been a straightforward guy. Grew up in a modest neighborhood where you learn early on that hard work and trust are the only things that matter. I worked my way through college, did the 9-to-5 grind, and finally managed to rent this place. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. I wasn't asking for much, just a roof over my head, a safe place to rest after long days of working at a tech startup. That's where Vincent came in. He wasn't much different from any other landlord at first glance. It's just another middle-aged guy trying to make a living by owning a few properties. At least that's how it seemed. I remember when I first signed the lease, I felt reassured. The building was old, but I liked it. The high ceilings, the wooden floors, it had character. A piece of history in a city was quickly becoming nothing but condos and coffee shops. Vincent wasn't the most personable guy. He'd stop by every now and then, but only to collect rent or check up on maintenance. When I first moved in, he seemed like a guy who kept to himself, like a distant uncle who only showed up for the important stuff. It was nothing extraordinary, just business. But over time, I started noticing things. Little signs that Vincent wasn't as reliable or as respectable as he liked to act. For one, he had a habit of showing up unannounced, demanding rent early when it wasn't even due yet. When I asked for basic repairs like fixing a leaky faucet or repairing the heating system, he'd push them off with vague excuses, always saying, "I'll get to it," or "it's not that big of a deal." That's when I started to see the cracks in his facte. It was clear that Vincent wasn't a man of his word, and I should have seen the warning signs sooner. But I didn't. I kept paying my rent month after month, always on time. I trusted him because I had no reason not to. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't feel like betrayal until you realize it's what you've been blind to. Then came the rent hikes. Small at first, almost imperceptible increases that didn't seem too bad. But when he raised it again this time by $200, I had to speak up. I couldn't afford it, and I wasn't about to just sit back and let him keep taking advantage of me. When I questioned him, his response was simple. The market's changing. Prices go up. You either pay or you leave. At first, I felt guilty for even asking about it, like I was the one who was causing trouble. But as I looked around at the other tenants, I realized it wasn't just me. Many of them had been pushed out, priced out, or silenced. It was the same cycle. Vincent raised the rent, ignored maintenance, and when tenants couldn't take it anymore, he found someone else to fill the space. It didn't matter to him who got hurt along the way. As long as the money came in, that's all he cared about. And yet, I kept living in the building. Despite the frustration, despite the feeling that something wasn't right, I stayed. Maybe I was too comfortable, too used to it. Maybe I was just too damn trusting. But the eviction notice was different. This time, Vincent had crossed a line. This wasn't just about a rent hike or some maintenance issue. This was a personal attack. He was throwing me out without explanation, without warning. That's when I realized how badly I'd been played. Vincent didn't care about me or the other tenants. We were just assets to him, money-making machines in his little empire. His arrogance and greed had finally pushed me too far. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I started researching the building, digging through property records and landlord-tenant laws. I found out that Vincent didn't even own the entire spot. Building outright. He had a mortgage, but his business dealings were complicated. That's when I got the idea. If he thought he could throw me out without consequence, he was sorely mistaken. I wasn't going to just fight him with legal jargon or empty threats. No, I was going to take what he loved most, his precious property, and turn the tables. If Vincent thought he could get away with destroying people's lives, I was about to show him what it felt like to lose everything. I began making plans. It was time for Vincent to face the consequences of his actions. I would buy his building. For just $1, once the shock of the eviction notice wore off, I went into overdrive. I knew this wasn't going to be a simple battle over rent or broken promises. Vincent had made it personal. He'd crossed a line. Now I was going to make sure he felt the full weight of his arrogance. I didn't waste any time. The first step was gathering information. I spent days going over property records, looking at the history of the building. I had to learn everything about Vincent's financial situation. The property's value, the legal intricacies surrounding, the lease agreements, pored over documents, checked city zoning laws, and made phone calls to people who might know more than I did. I didn't have a lawyer yet, but I knew the law well enough to navigate the basics. I needed to understand every angle before I made my move. Then came the phone call. I reached out to a friend of mine who worked in real estate. His name was Mike, and he was one of those guys who seemed to know everyone in town. He'd helped me with a few small deals in the past, so I trusted him. I explained what had happened with Vincent and laid out my plan. I'm going to buy his building for $1, said, not hiding my determination. Mike laughed at first, thinking I was joking. But when I went into the details, how Vincent had been negligent, how he was behind on payments, how his shady dealings with contractors and vendors had left him with a heap of legal issues, Mike's tone shifted. Man, this is actually doable, he said after a long pause. The building's in bad shape. He's overextended himself, and he's struggling. If you play this right, you could get it for a steal. That's when things started to get real. Mike had connections with real estate investors, people who could help me access the right documents, negotiate with the bank, and, most importantly, get Vincent to sell. I wasn't just going to show up and make an offer. I needed to make Vincent believe I was his best option. I needed him to feel like this was the only way out. The next step was setting the trap. Vincent had always been proud of the building. He acted like it was a gold mine, like he was sitting on a gold mine while the rest of us were struggling to make rent. But I knew the truth. The building was old, poorly maintained, and had been losing value for years. Vincent wasn't investing in its upkeep. He was letting it deteriorate while collecting rent from tenants who kept the place alive. I knew he wouldn't be able to sustain it much longer. And that's where I came in. I started pushing his buttons without him realizing it. I knew he was watching the market, watching prices rise, watching other buildings around him get renovated. So, I started making my moves quietly, sowing the seeds of doubt. I spoke to contractors, casually mentioning renovations I'd planned for my own place. Word got around that I was preparing to buy a property in the area, something I knew would catch Vincent's attention. It wasn't long before he came knocking. "Andrew, I heard you're looking at that building down the street," Vincent said one evening when he dropped by to check on my apartment, a phrase I'd come to dread. "I hope you're not getting any funny ideas about taking over this place." I kept my voice steady, masking my grin. "Not at all, Vincent. I'm just looking at my options. You know how it is in this market. People are trying to buy up anything they can." He narrowed his eyes, clearly unsettled. "Well, this one's not going anywhere. It's staying in my hands." I could see the pride on his face, the arrogance that made me sick. But I played it cool, pretending to back off, pretending to be the tenant who would never challenge his authority. But inside, I knew I was winning. Over the next few weeks, I continued to build my case. I found out about Vincent's financial troubles, how he had defaulted on multiple loans, how his business dealings were tied up in legal knots. I learned that he was at risk of losing the building to foreclosure if he didn't pay off his debts. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Vincent wasn't the one in control. Mike set up a meeting with a few investors who were looking to buy distressed properties. The plan was simple. I would present an offer to Vincent that he couldn't refuse $1. The key was making it seem like the best option for him. If he didn't sell, he risked foreclosure. If he did, he'd get out of his financial mess with a little dignity left. I knew I could make this work, but I also knew that Vincent wouldn't just roll over. I would have to play my hand carefully. There were still pieces to move, but everything was coming together. My revenge wouldn't be about flashy confrontations or making a scene. It was going to be calculated, methodical, and absolutely devastating for Vincent. If you're enjoying this calculated takedown, hit that subscribe button for more stories where justice finally catches up to those who think they're above. Consequences. Now, back to the plan. The day had come. I was ready. I had all my documents, all my research. Everything was in place. Now it was time to face Vincent. He had no idea what was coming for him. Vincent called me that morning, his voice full of bravado, just like it always was. "Andrew, I think it's time we have a little chat. Want to make sure you're not planning anything funny with that building down the street." I could hear the threat in his voice, but I wasn't worried. This was my moment, and it would be a game changer. I agreed to meet him at the office building across the street from my neutral ground. Somewhere neither of us could feel too comfortable. I was on edge, but I had rehearsed everything in my head, over and over. I had the upper hand now, and I was going to take full advantage of it. When I walked into the small conference room, Vincent was already seated, his hands folded on the table like he was some sort of king awaiting an audience. He looked the same as ever, well-dressed. But there was something about him that seemed nervous, maybe even a little desperate. I could tell he wasn't the confident landlord I had once known. He was a man in decline. "Andrew, let's make this quick," he said, eyeing me with suspicion. "You came to talk, so talk." I sat down opposite him, leaning forward slightly, my eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about the building. I've decided to make you an offer." Vincent raised an eyebrow, intrigued but trying not to show it. "Go on," he said, his voice betraying a hint of amusement. "What offer?" I slid the papers across the table. "I'm offering you a deal. I know you've been struggling with the mortgage. I know things aren't going as smoothly as you'd like. Building's not worth as much as it used to be, and it's falling apart. I can help you with that, but it comes with one condition." Vincent glanced at the papers, but didn't pick them up right away. "And what condition would that be?" I watched him carefully. "I'll buy the building from you for $1. His face went blank, then twisted into a confused frown. "You're out of your mind." "Ow. The building's worth much more than that." "Ow. Got a mortgage? Legal fees? You're not serious." I remained calm, keeping my voice even. "I'm absolutely serious. I've done my research, Vincent. I know about your financial troubles. I know about the liens on the property, the lawsuits. Piling up against you, the unpaid bills. If you don't sell, the bank will take it from you anyway. So this is your chance to walk away with something. It's the only option you have left. Vincent's eyes flickered, and for the first time I saw the cracks in his armor. "You're bluffing," he muttered, but there was no confidence behind his words anymore. "I don't need to sell. I've got options." I leaned in closer. "You know as well as I do that you don't have options, Vincent. This is your way out. Take the dollar. Walk away with some dignity. You won't have to worry about this place anymore. I can finally stop hearing complaints from the tenants you've been neglecting." The silence in the room stretched between us. Vincent shifted in his seat, clearly struggling with what to do. His mind raced as he considered his options, but I could see the panic setting in. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a reckoning. "I won't sell," he said finally, but even his voice shook with uncertainty. "You think you can pressure me into this? I've been doing this for years. I know how to play the game." I didn't flinch. "I know you think you can handle it, Vincent, but you've underestimated me. You've underestimated the damage you've caused." The room was thick with tension. Vincent opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you. I will buy this building. For $1, take it or leave it." Vincent's gaze flickered to the papers I had presented. The numbers, the details, everything was right there. The truth was undeniable. I had everything he had tried to hide. For the first time, I knew. He understood that. There was a long, awkward silence, but finally he spoke again, his voice low and defeated. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't respond. There was no need. The facts spoke for themselves. And then the twist. Just as Vincent seemed to slump, almost ready to accept his fate, his phone buzzed loudly. He checked the message, his face going pale as he read it. It was from his lawyer. "They've started foreclosure proceedings," he whispered, his words trembling. "I'm out of time, aren't I?" It was my moment. I had him. He knew I had the power to pull this off, and there was no way out for him now. "Yes, Vincent, you're out of time," I said coldly. "This is your last chance." The game was over. He was broken. It was a quiet few days after our meeting. Vincent's phone calls became fewer, his visits non-existent. He seemed to be in hiding, and I knew exactly why. The weight of his mistakes had finally caught up with him. He was trapped in a corner with nowhere to run. And me. I was preparing for the final step, making sure this was wrapped up in the most satisfying way possible. Morning the deal was finalized, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't just about buying the building for $1. It was about sending a message. Vincent had taken advantage of people for far too long. It was time for justice to find its way back into the equation. I met with Mike and the investors. Early that morning to finalize the transaction, the paperwork was signed quickly, and just like that, I owned the building. A wave of accomplishment washed over me, but it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. I still had Vincent to deal with, and the consequences of his actions weren't going to be forgotten. By midday, I made the call. I dialed his number, my heart pounding, but my voice steady as ever. "Vincent," I said when he picked up, "I just wanted to let you know that the deal's done. I own the building now." There was silence on the other end for a long moment, and then the familiar voice cracked. "What do you want from me? What do you want me to do now?" I could hear the panic in his voice. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything, scrambling for any escape. But I wasn't about to make it easy for him. "I don't need anything from you, Vincent," I replied coolly. "But I think you should know that I've already spoken to the tenants. They're all aware of what's been going on. I'm letting them know that from now on, this building will be under new management, fair management." "You can't do this," he stammered. "This is my livelihood. You can't just take it all away from me." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke again. "I'm not taking anything away from you, Vincent. You've already lost it all. It's just the natural consequence of your greed. It's all the people you've hurt, all the families you've pushed out. They deserve better. And now they're going to get it." A strange sense of satisfaction settling over me. Vincent's days of manipulation were over. His empire of neglect and exploitation was crumbling beneath him. And I was the one who had brought it all down. The news spread quickly. Word got around that Vincent had sold the building for a fraction of its worth, unable to stop the foreclosure or pay off his debts. The tenants were thrilled finally. They'd have a landlord who cared about their well-being. They weren't going to be treated like disposable assets anymore. But there was something else, something bigger. As the days passed, I began receiving calls and messages from people in the community. Other former tenants of Vincent's people, who had been wronged by him in the past, reached out to thank me. I had no idea how many people had suffered in silence because of him. The building was just one piece of his empire, and I had taken it down piece by piece. Vincent's reputation was obliterated. News of his financial struggles, his shady dealings, and his mistreatment of tenants spread like wildfire. He couldn't hide from the truth any longer. Within weeks, his name became synonymous with greed and dishonesty. His assets were seized. His connections abandoned him, and the life he had carefully built crumbled to dust. As for me, I took over the building, but I didn't just make it a place to collect rent. I made sure it became a community again, a home, not just a business. I began fixing the things Vincent had neglected. The repairs that had been ignored for years finally started getting done. And while I knew that buying the building was just the beginning, it was also the final step in taking back control of my life. Vincent's final call came 2 months later. He was a broken man, desperate and humbled. "Andrew, I need help," he said, barely above a whisper. "Please." Lost everything. I could feel the temptation to gloat, but I resisted. Instead, I simply said, "You had your chance. Vincent, you chose greed over decency. Now you're going to have to figure out how to rebuild just like everyone else." I hung up, not out of spite, but out of the realization that there was no more to say. He had already sealed his fate. In the end, I walked away with more than just a building. I gained something far more important: my peace of mind. I had stood up for myself, for the tenants who'd been taken advantage of, and for anyone else who had been silenced by those in power. My revenge wasn't just about the building. It was about taking back what was mine and showing Vincent that no one is untouchable when they betray others. The building became a symbol of something bigger: justice, and I was the one who had made it happen.